So I want to take a look at using smart objects and smart filters and so forth. Now, when we adjust an image, you could go up to layer image, so image adjustment. So you could come in here and do image adjustment. So this would be our color corrections and a lot of different things. But all of this would be destructive because this, from this menu, is going to be done directly on your image, so it's destructive. Most of these are available down here. So we've talked about them a little bit already. Let's talk about them a little bit more. Levels. Now, when you open up, when you add a levels, you get this sort of a situation. This is the property panel for levels. And what we've got in levels is this is a histogram. So a histogram is really a bar chart. There's 256 lines here, which represent the distribution of black and white across the image. By sliding these around, you can modify the contrast of the image. This bottom one is overall brightness and darkness. So this will move everything brighter or darker. This changes the contrast. So this is non-destructive. Let's say I went very dark like this, and then said, okay, this has automatically a layer mask. So with the layer mask, I could then control where this layer is affecting my images below or not. So if I choose black, and I'll use a gradient foreground to transparent, and on here, if I paint on here, that hides that effect. So the effect is, wherever this is not. Black conceals, white reveals. So levels is really important. Levels is one that you're going to use for making color correction. So there are a number of them in here. We're going to look at hue saturation and a few of these. Some of them are only available if you are in an RGB mode. So on my image up here, you can see it says black and white, but it's actually woman in, and it says it's RGB. So it's red, green, and blue. It's not truly a black and white photograph. It's an RGB image. I could change it up under image mode grayscale. Grayscale would change it to a truly black and white image. But more often than not, if you're going to go to black and white, you want to use the adjustment layer, black and white, because this gives you a lot more control and you can finesse the black and white to come up with the best image possible, particularly if you're changing it from a full color image. She's not truly black and white, but she's not full color really either. But let's look at adding filters. All right, so first thing, I'm going to rename it. So you can give her some name. You can give her an actual name if you want. I'll just call it woman. And then we can go up to filter. Now I can convert for smart filters. When I do that, you're going to see this symbol here. That means this has been converted to a smart object. So we can add now smart filters on top of it. It'll actually stack them below this layer without it damaging the image. So for example, we have something called a filter gallery. If I go into the filter gallery, I'm going to zoom out here so I can see her. That's what this particular effect would create. I could go to, say, neon. We could go into different brush strokes. Style, so like here's the glowing edges. And initially it only lets you add like one effect, but there is a way, I have to research it again because I haven't done it in a long time, but there is a way to add multiple effects from this gallery. But let's say, I don't know, maybe I'll go with that, or watercolor. I'll say okay. Now also, now you can hide this right here if you wanted to. This also comes with a mask. I'm going to show you how to use that in just a second. Let's say we add another filter. Instead of from the filter gallery, I'm going to go to blur, and I'm going to add a box blur. Actually, let me correct that. I want to add a different blur. I want to add a motion blur. Let's see, radial blur. I want to add a radial blur. Let's do a radial blur. Sorry, radial blur. And I want it to be a zoom. Now I want this zoom blur to come right off her nose. Crank this all the way up, and that's what it's going to look like. See, this interface is really old, and it should match, I think, the format of the image, but it doesn't. It's always square. So I have to guess where her nose is, and then I can move this around to try and be on the nose. I'll say, okay. Yeah, I'm off a little bit. So I'll double click on the radial blur, open it up, and I got to move it over and up slightly. Try it again. Almost there. Okay, I'll go with that. So about there. Now let's say I add that filter, see what that does. Okay, weird. Now I could use a brush. So I'm going to use a brush with a very soft brush and pretty wide, pretty big. So go up the size. There it is. And I'm going to use the airbrush mode, but lower the flow. And then I'll just paint in here, and I'm hiding these two effects. So it's kind of cool. And it's completely non-destructive. And then you can keep adding, you can add more. You can add more effects. If you want to add more from the filter gallery, I've got to research that. But you can add all these others. You can just keep adding some of these other things, like stylize, solarize is usually kind of interesting. See, it gives it this kind of weird look, and you can turn off the other ones. And but you can only have the one mask. So this mask is going to hide every filter that you apply. If you wanted to have this solarize on her face and not be masked, we would have to figure out a different way of doing it. We'd have to, duplicate the image or something like that, because this mask is going to hide everything that's in here. Okay, now let's say we wanted to modify the smart object. Okay, this is a smart object. So what is a smart object? A smart object means that the image of the woman, the original pristine image, is being kept in memory, untouched, and in perfect form, the same way as it was when we first opened it. We can get to it by double clicking on it. And now this is our original image. This is not the image that was saved on our desktop. This is the image that is now in our Photoshop document. And we could manipulate this. Like I could add a solid color, say, above her. I want to get maybe those kind of weird greens of that solarize. I don't know. Maybe like that. And then change this to one of these. Kind of cool. Or go down to color. I'm just going to go to color. Then I could, I could just leave it like this, save it. I have to do save. And then I go back to my original one where I've got the, it's this one. This has my smart object in it. Still saying a JPEG. If I save it now, it won't save it as a JPEG because I would lose all this. I'd have to save it as a PSD. I'll just save it on my desktop. So now it wants to save this as a PSD so that I can keep my filters. And now the only drawback of having smart objects is it makes your file larger because you're keeping the original image in the background in storage. And then it's always available if you need to go back and manipulate it. So I could always go back and change any of these settings, hit Command S, and then go back to my saved version like that. So it's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun. Now let's open up that one with the room. It's called 483842 low to JPEG. I want to talk about adjustment layers here and color correction. You're going to do color correction in the tutorial, but I want to give you a little bit more information about it, and then I'll try to make this available on the server later. I'm going to use my pen tool. Now, we haven't talked about the pen tool yet. There's a tutorial on that this week. I'm using the pen tool to make a path around this pillow, and then I'm going to turn the path into a selection. So this is the way I work. I create a path. I'm in path. I'm not in shape. If you're in path, what it's going to do is create a path in the path panel. Paths are independent of layers. This has nothing to do with any layer, but I can use the path. And by the way, you'd want to name a path when you create a path, so I'll just call this pillow, because if you don't name it, and then you start another path, your first path will disappear. So I'll just name it, and that's saved it. You could turn the path into a selection by command clicking. You could click this third button or command click on the thumbnail of the path. So that's turned into a selection. I actually, let's see, is that what yeah, okay, so I've got a selection, and now I'm going to add my adjustment layer. So I'll add a levels. And what the levels did was it created a mask based on the selection. So now if I modify this, I'm going to be modifying only the pillow because that's what's being masked out. I actually want to modify the rest of the image and not the pillow. So I'm going to invert the mask by pressing Command I. So now if I open this up, where is it? Nope, I don't want to open that up. I want to open up, there it is, here. So now the pillow is not going to be changed, but everything else is. Now this is how we make color corrections with the levels. A lot of times with levels or curves. You have other presets that allow you to make color corrections, but they're all based on levels and curves. Curves is probably the most powerful of any of the adjustment layer, any adjustment layers, but curves is not very user-friendly and it takes some getting used to. So that's why they give you a bunch of other presets to make it easier. But levels is pretty easy. So let's say I wanted to change this color to gold. First of all, remember we have RGB. This is light. The equivalent of this in print would be CMYK. So the way most of us are used to mixing color with pigment. We learned from elementary school how to use crayons and so forth. We're not used to mixing light. So, but let's say I wanted to go golden with this. I would have to think of C, so that's cyan, magenta, and this would be yellow. So for one thing, I could go to the blue. One way is going to go yellow, the other way is going to go blue. So this way I can go more yellow this way. Now I want to get some of the green out, which would be cyan and green. So RGB, red, green, blue, CMY. So this would be magenta, but this would be cyan. So I go in here and I can move it and I could go this way and I get rid of the cyan. So we're getting more into the golden color. This would be magenta. So one way is going to go green and one way is going to go magenta. So it's going to go magenta, it's going to go green. So I actually want a little bit of magenta out. And I'm going to go back into my yellow and see if I can push the yellow more. So pretty darn yellow that. Now what if I just wanted to change the pillow now? Well, I could duplicate, Command D. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong program. After Effects is Command D. So I'm going to, you can just duplicate it by dragging it down here, or Command J will duplicate the layer. And now I'm going to invert the mask because I want to work on the pillow. So with the mask inverted.
How did you invert the mask?
The mask, it's Command I for invert. Command I. Click on the mask, Command I. Now, let's say I want to make the pillow purple. So I would want some blue. So I'll come in here and go to blue. Let's see if this will work. Yep, see it's going purple. Pretty good. I could go into the RGB. The RGB would be for contrast. So I could increase the contrast in the RGB. So this is the composited channel, RGB. And then you go into individual channels to change the color. So red, that would be cyan. Magenta, maybe I want a little bit of magenta in there. Like that. So we can make drastic changes to this image, to the color of this image, and to the blurriness of the image, everything like that, without damaging the image itself at all. So one thing, somebody was asking about, I think, blurring the background on something. One thing you could do is you can, I'll make this, I'll just call it room, have to rename it, room, and I could then make this a smart filter, and then I could add a blur, and in this case, I will do the radio blur again, but I won't do the spin. I mean, I won't do the zoom, I'll just do the spin, and try to get it like where the pillow is, maybe. I could just do a regular blur. Let me get back. Did I lose everything? It doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm just going to blur out the. I do want everything back though. How did I lose it all? Let's see. Let's have it in here somewhere. There it is. Okay. This one I want to change from a radio blur. I don't want the radio blur. I want just a regular blur. So I'll come in here and I'll do blur, Gaussian blur. Just blur the whole background out a little bit. And then let's say I want this part to be focused, not blurred. Then I would use this mask. Might be able to just use the gradient and in here. So this area would be this would get our attention. Now, if you had a complicated illustration like I think Queenie had, you could put the illustration. This is what I did on something just recently. If I had a number of things going on, I could put it all into a group. So let's say we put this in a group. I did Command G. So let's say I've got a bunch of different things in here. I don't know. I'll add a layer and I don't know. I'll just put in some kind of I want linear. Okay, so let's say I've got a number of things inside this group and I wanted to add this blur effect to the whole group. I can't really put it on a group the way you can put a mask on a group. So that's one thing you can do. You can hide everything in the group with this mask. So that's very handy. But in this case, what I want to do is actually duplicate the group. And Command J, I think, will duplicate the group as well. Now this one I'm going to get rid of down here. So I'll just get rid of smart filters. And this one, in fact, this one I'm going to get rid of this blur as well. Get rid of all of them. Okay, but then I'll merge the group. So this would be destructive in that it is putting all of the images together in a single layer, but I have kept a backup that is not. Now here, I could do the same trick that I just did as far as convert for smart object and then add the filter. So this is one way that if you got a complicated background and you either want to blur the whole thing or blur part of it, you could do this, but duplicate it first so you've got it all, and then make it a smart object, and then add your blur. Okay, so there are a couple of other adjustment layers I want to cover that I think are very valuable. I'm going to get rid of these two right now. Okay, so they are curves. Curves is as I said before, curves is a very powerful tool. It's one of the most powerful, but it's not the most user-friendly. So let me, I'll go ahead and make a selection of the pillow. We'll do the same sort of thing, but we'll do it with curves. So curves looks like this. This is the histogram that we saw previously in levels. This represents the distribution of lights and darks. Now the way we modify the image using curves is you click on the curve and you make a point and then you drag, and then you're going to modify that area. Let's do an invert on this so you can see me modifying the main part of the image and not the pillow. So if I come in here and I pull this down, you see we're increasing the contrast. Now you can go like this and get all kinds of crazy results. If you pull this all the way down, then this is like modifying the overall brightness like we saw on levels at the bottom. Now you do have some helpers, some tools that help you. Like if you want to set the white, this is for sample an image to set the white point. So you click here and let's say, so this would say we want this lamp to be white. Then it adjusts the rest of the image appropriately so that this will be white and everything else will be properly adjusted. You also have something called automatic. Here's auto. So auto will adjust it to what the computer thinks is best. Usually auto doesn't work very well for me. So I don't usually use auto. I usually prefer to do it on my own. This is in point mode. You can also do a pencil mode and you can just draw like this and you get all kinds of crazy things. So it's usually not very helpful. Now you can also go into, as with levels, you go into the individual channels in order to modify, I'm going to go back into point mode, modify the color. So again, if I wanted to go golden, I'd go into the blue, CMY, and one way is going to go blue, the other way is going to go yellow. And you can pull this down, darken it. If I want more magenta, so forth. We go in here, same. So it's just the same. It's just that you're using these curves. So now you can fine tune it. One thing that's tricky with this is when you modify one curve, it tends to modify another. You modify one part, one point, it modifies the curve on both sides of it, which can get confusing. So as I said, we go into individual color channels. Now, if I make modifications in the color channels, and then I go back to the RGB composite, you can see which channels have been modified. You can't grab them until you go into that channel. But this is helpful so you can know where the image has been manipulated. I think it's a nice, helpful little visual there. Okay, so curves. That's curves. Another one that I find really useful is and easy is hue saturation. Hue saturation lets you modify, it'll shift all the colors in the image relative to one another. So if I see, I can just shift like this and they all shift. Now I could, again, I could separate the pillow or any part of it I want and it won't be affected because this has a layer mask like all adjustment layers. One way that you can get a black and white image is to reduce the saturation completely. Take all the saturation out, you've got a grayscale image. But a lot of times when you're compositing and you're mixing images, you're going to have to reduce saturation because a lot of times, if you look at the car, this is highly saturated. I think they've manipulated this after to make it super saturated. The dunes are not. It's not saturated. So you're going to have to do some color adjustment in order to make those match. So hue saturation, anyway, I find is quite useful, actually, particularly for exploring just different options. Another one that I like, you have to be an RGB for some of these, but I do like the black and white. So if you want to take an RGB image and turn it into black and white, this is way better than using the desaturate or going up to mode and changing it to grayscale. This one gives you more control because you can change the individual colors and really finesse the image to get a much richer black and white than you might otherwise achieve. This one has a lot in the yellow, obviously. So that one's very nice. Then you've got color balance can be useful. These photo filters are good for, these are all presets. You got a ton of them in here. And so this is what I was talking about, just making it, these are really curve adjustments that have just been saved out as presets. So they can be, they can be handy, quick and dirty. Now down at the bottom here, you have some interesting ones. Posterize. I like to mix these sometimes. So, so for example, I'll duplicate my bottom layer. This one, I won't have I want this to be on only this one. So I'll create a layer clipping mask. So it's only on that one. So then you could reduce the opacity of this, for example, and you could let some of the original show through. So you're kind of reducing the effect of the posterization. Can be interesting. Also, another one that's interesting is threshold. Threshold can make it extremely like black and white. I haven't got it this reduced. Let me crank this up. It'll go black and white. So that could be interesting, and particularly if you put it on multiply, and we could play around with this a little bit. So this can give you some interesting results. Add posterize. Let's interesting. Up here, and maybe put this on here. So, you get some, for artistic results, you can get some pretty interesting things by mixing and matching these. Okay, so those are sort of my favorites. Brightness and contrast is convenient. You can do the same thing with levels and curves, but it is convenient. So this is exactly what you can do with either levels of curves, but it's more user-friendly. Let's see, what else? Channel mixer is a little confusing. You can get some very creative results. Maybe we'll come back to that a little bit later. You can invert here. This is inverting the color. So, but it's a full color image. If this was just inverting the black and white, it flips the black and white. But this is inverting the color, so we end up with this like negative look, which can be interesting, for certain special effects. It can be very interesting.